Some of the themes discussed in this podcast are for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
This is a serialized podcast, so I suggest that you start at episode 1 to enjoy the whole story.
Beware, my friend, trouble roads are to come. Tall grass, long snakes, fall not through their charm. Lift your head, forget the dance in your pride. Sometimes in life we need to be fooled twice.
Fool Me Twice follows the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, in her attempts to find love online. I'm Zara Hannaford, and in this series, I'm trying to understand romance scams, why people fall for them, and how they work. Elina Juusola was the victim of a sweetheart scam and is the author of Love on the Line, a book about dealing with the aftermath of romance scams.
All the research shows that there is no special type for people who are going to get scammed. Everyone can get scammed. That's the consensus of all the research. But there's always this other aspect of vulnerability. And what I have found is that people always have a point of vulnerability when they are susceptible. So even if you are the strongest person in the world, the scammers will be able to look for these vulnerable moments when you are ill, when you are feeling down. And so they can always attack you at that right time. Very often when you have these scamming going on, you could even afterwards see how this kind of a process is going, and then you can sort of pinpoint when you've been most vulnerable and the scammer has actually asked you for money. So it's about the vulnerability, I think that's the most one. But on the other hand, also you can have the fact that the persons who are being scammed are a type of person like true believer. The concept of true believer means that you believe that everyone else acts honorably. And so you can believe in that way. And that's why you do believe that the scammers also fall into that category of people to be honorable, like you are, the one who is being scammed. So that's also one of the places where people then find, or the scammers then can find the vulnerability point to ask for money, for example, or do any kind of other scamming.
In 2014, a woman from Texas met a man named Charlie online. Initially, they liked and commented on posts on each other's wall. Eventually, they exchanged emails and began sharing photos. She says that she knew, just based on the conversations that they had, that he was someone she wanted to meet. They'd sing together and pray together and talk about what happened at church on Sunday. The following information comes from the FBI's website. He claimed to be in the building and construction industry. He was trying to finish up a job in California, the woman said, and he needed some money to help finish the job. She thought about it long and hard and prayed about it. She says she'd always been a very giving person and figured that since she had the money, she could send him some. He promised to have it back within 24 to 48 hours. To her, it was a kind of a statement of faith in their relationship. She wired him $30,000. After a few days without getting her money back, she still thought everything was okay. She imagined that he was just the victim of some bad luck. And then he needed another $30,000. Over the following 2 years, she believed Charlie's stories after each new request for funds. Everything he had said just seemed to make sense. After all, they were in love. Eventually, her financial advisor became alarmed about her steadily dwindling accounts and urged her to contact the FBI. The subsequent investigation resulted in the arrest of 2 Nigerians posing as South African diplomats who had come to the US to collect money from the woman on behalf of Charlie, who claimed he was paid $42 million for a construction project he completed in South Africa. The woman believed she would be paying to have the money, including the repayment of her $2 million, transferred to the US from South Africa, where Charlie was supposedly working. In July 2016, the 2 Nigerian co-conspirators pleaded guilty in connection with their roles in the scam, and a federal judge sentenced them each to 36 months in prison. But Charlie is still at large, presumably in Nigeria, and there may be little hope of bringing him to justice. Romance scams are notoriously difficult to prove and therefore to prosecute, as hiding behind a computer makes it almost impossible to find out who someone is. It's usually easy for the scammer to remain anonymous, as most of the time, scammers don't meet their victims. In my mother's case, she'd gone a step beyond the norm. In her excitement to meet this man who she thought could be her life partner, she'd caused them to skip a couple of steps in the scammer's handbook. Now that she was in physical proximity to her scammer, and he had exhausted all possible angles to wring money out of her, things began to take a dangerous turn. It's likely that he was as much in uncharted territory as she was. She was no longer useful to him, and she had finally begun to see that all was not as it seemed. In an effort, probably, to keep the money he was able to get from her and sever contact, Truman began to act erratic and violent. Fool Me Twice is sponsored by Buster Rut, a health and well-being program that's changed Jules' life for the better.
Angela Hancock is the founder of Buster Rut and is passionate about empowering her clients to perform at the highest levels in all areas of their lives, physically and mentally, both at work and play. If you commit to her superfood nutritional system for just 30 days, you will kickstart your health journey and create a sustainable framework so that you can enjoy a healthy lifestyle in the long term. You'll be embraced by a supportive community which will keep you inspired, motivated, and accountable. Layer her nutritional system into your existing regime or completely replace your current one. The choice is yours and will depend on your personal health goals. Healthy aging, improved sleep, increased energy, mental focus, fat loss, muscle gain, enhanced performance, better mood. These are just some of the benefits reported by her clients.
Chapter 1: The Explosion. My mother had been a smoker on and off for 20 years. Since Truman had told her that it was a deal breaker for him, she saw it as an opportunity to quit. When he left her alone in the hotel all night after taking the hire car, she woke up the next morning in a panic. She knew she needed to stay calm and make a plan, so she defaulted to her old patterns and went to a service station across the road to get a pack of cigarettes. She got the number for the Australian consulate and the local police from the concierge at the hotel, and called the Australian consulate in the UK. Straight away, she was put through to someone in Canberra. She was advised to wait a couple more hours and then call the police and report the car stolen.
The guy at the front desk asked if I was all right. I told him what was happening and he suggested that I contact the hire car company and got me the number. He was really kind and obviously concerned, and I was grateful for his help. I thanked him and went outside for my second cigarette in 6 days, thinking vaguely of the one Truman and I had shared in the nightclub only the day before. As I put my cigarette out in an empty Coke can, I noticed Truman walking through the car park about 40 metres away. I jumped up and walked inside, and I heard him shout, "Jules," behind me. I ignored him, slipped into the lobby and told the guy at the desk that Truman had arrived, and asked him not to say anything when he walked in. I heard the sliding doors open and I turned around to greet him. He wouldn't speak and stormed past me towards the lift. I followed him up to the room, which probably wasn't a good idea, but I was more afraid of losing the hire car. He still had the keys and I needed to get them. Standing silently with him in the lift, I became aware of his physical power. He was tall and heavy-set with fierce eyes and an aggressive, intense body language. I worried that I'd let my concern over the car override my natural instinct to preserve my life. I had a terrible feeling that things were about to get nasty. When we got into the room, he stood there glaring at me. I casually asked him how the vigil was, trying not to let him hear the fear in my voice, and he kicked off. He screamed that I was a manipulator and a liar and that he'd caught me smoking. He thought I'd run back into the lobby because I was smoking and didn't want him to see me. I reminded him that he'd smoked the previous night with me, and he said that that was okay because we were together. He accused me of smoking all week and lying to him, so I showed him the new cigarette packet with only one missing. He just kept bellowing at me and pointing his finger in my face and calling me a liar and a manipulator. As he edged closer and closer, I considered my options. I was aware that the hotel room was basically soundproof, and I was possibly alone with this man on an empty floor. I inched backwards slowly and I stood between him and the door. All I wanted were the car keys. He was a few inches taller, but I felt like he was towering over me, spitting into my face as he screamed. I begged him not to hurt me. Part of me was thinking, oh crap, here we go again, because I'd been in relationships before that had ended violently, and I thought that if I just kept my cool, I could get through this one as well. Knowing what I'd learnt from dealing with this before, I knew that I should not get angry or hysterical, as that would just escalate the situation and put me at much greater risk. I was relying on instinct to get the car keys back and get out alive. In hindsight, this was not a wise move. It was a huge risk to have gone up to the room with him, and no amount of money is worth risking my life over. So I asked for the car keys back, and he insisted that he would return the car on Tuesday. I asked him again very calmly for the keys in a rational and neutral voice, and for some unexplained reason, he threw the car keys at me. I caught them and held them tightly in my hand. Then he lunged past me, knocking me sideways into the wall, and he pulled open the door with all his might. The swinging door smashed me face first and crushed my whole body between the door and the wall like the stroke of a hammer. It happened so fast, I hardly registered the effect at all. But I screamed on impact, and it took a few seconds for me to gather my senses. I shakily followed him down the corridor as I knew that he had to get his things out of the car and would need me to open it. I also wanted to get out of the room in the empty corridor, downstairs to where people were and where I would feel marginally safer. My mind raced with possible courses of action to get him out of my life swiftly and safely. When I arrived outside the lift, he was already in it, with two small blokes pressing their backs up against the lift wall, quaking with fear. Truman was still screaming abuse at me and calling me a manipulative bitch, amongst other things. While I watched from the foyer, the lift door closed, and I'll never forget the image of the two little guys looking at me with their mouths and eyes wide open, and this big hulking man going ballistic at me as the metal doors closed. I quickly jumped in the other lift and he was waiting for me in the foyer. As soon as I appeared, he towered over me and started screaming at me. He was swearing, calling me a liar and a manipulator, and generally going crazy, gesticulating and throwing his arms around. Outwardly, I remained totally calm through all of this. The guy behind the front desk, whose wife had now joined him, called out to Truman to stop swearing and threatening me. Truman then turned on them and started screaming at them. He advanced towards the front desk ferociously, yelling at the couple to mind their business and stating that he could do whatever he liked. He was pointing at them both and roaring like a lunatic. They clutched each other and looked terrified. I went outside, hoping to draw Truman away from abusing the hotel staff, and it worked. He followed me out to the car. I stopped a short distance away from him and unlocked the car with the remote. Truman started to unpack the boot, all the while still yelling at me and swearing. I noticed a new pair of shoes in there and an awful pink jacket that I suspect may have been a gift for me, as we planned to exchange Christmas gifts that day. He'd clearly been on a spending spree and out partying all night. Truman had forgotten his bag in the room and he ordered me to go and get it. I went back upstairs and got his bag as fast as I could. I wanted to take back all of the medicine that I bought him, but if he noticed, it could just tip him over the edge because he was right on the precipice. I left it all where it was and went back down to the car park with his bag. My heart was going crazy, but I maintained my composure. As I walked through the car park, Truman was watching me with a face like thunder, glaring at me intently with very threatening body language. I spotted a man out there having a smoke. While walking at a steady pace so as not to arouse any suspicion and let Truman know I was speaking to him, I quickly and quietly said to the man, "Please watch me, and if this guy starts to beat me, please call the cops." He looked at me with a combination of fear and empathy and reassured me quietly that he would keep an eye on me. His kindness made me want to crumble, but I snapped back to reality and kept moving. I approached the car, handed Truman his bag and asked for the £600 I'd given him the previous night. He replied, "What money?" I answered, "The money I gave you yesterday," and he said it was all gone and that he'd used it already. He aggressively offered for me to search him. In one last-ditch effort, I asked him about the other money that I'd lent him, and he angrily yelled that he would pay it back as we'd arranged. It was beginning to dawn on me that I may never see any of that money again. Truman's anger and vitriol was rising rapidly, and he seemed to be working himself into a wild frenzy. He said that I should F off and he didn't care if he went to jail. He repeated this 3 times. I thought that it was really frightening that he was talking about going to jail and that he didn't care. It flashed across my mind that perhaps he'd been to jail before, and this was a huge warning sign that he was really unhinged and just how much my life was still at risk. Even in broad daylight with the guy watching us in the car park, I knew I was still not safe. This was my cue to back off as he seemed like he was about to completely snap. I locked the car with the remote and I moved away quickly. I knew now that I would never get the money. It was worth a try, but I pushed him to the limit and it was time to get away. As I walked back through the car park, a taxi came. He threw all of his goods from the boot of the car and his bag into the taxi and left.
This is Elina Juusola once again.
I think that the internal struggle started immediately. From the beginning of this scamming affair, the scamming which I was subject to, it was very, very fast. It only took about 2 months before the scammer asked for money, and it was like a whirlwind affair. I think that somehow in my own mind I had unconsciously been questioning if this person was a scammer, and that was due to my own family being very much suspicious. Other ones in my family were suspicious that I was being scammed, and the other ones were very supporting, say, "Oh, this is my mum, and she's calling with this man all the time and everything." So they were not suspicious at all. But it's also the trust issue that I would trust my family ever more than I would trust any other people. So when I felt that there was something wrong, and because my scammer was a military person and sent me information about him as a military person, after asking for money, and I was sort of saying, yes, I'm going to, I didn't even think about it at the moment because I happened to have the money, so I gave it to him. But then I asked him information about himself, and he sent me documentation, which I felt that wasn't right. And because of that, I sent that documentation to my son in London. And I said, well, you look at this man behind his back. If he's okay, then I would not feel that, I was somehow doing wrong. And it didn't take a long time before my son told me that it's a scammer. When he said that, I just felt relieved. I was relieved. I felt, okay, of course it was a scammer. if something would be too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And I immediately, everything went into the place. And I think it's more in people who have been scammed. It's a story of the trust, how much you trust people. And I trust my family about everything. So I trusted my son more than I would have trusted my love interest or anything like that. And so in that way, the process for me was quite quick. And as I said, I felt, of course, it had to be a scam. It wouldn't be so good. But of course, at the same time, then my researcher woke up and I then wanted to analyze why it had happened to me and what kind of reasons it was in myself that I let this happen to me. And so after I realized that I had been scammed, or my son had told me that this is a scammer, and I was absolutely sure that, yes, of course it is. So then I thought that, okay, I will talk to him as if, I didn't know about it. But since I know, well, I was sort of tricking him too. And we started talking about scamming. So I took into our conversations different kinds of scenarios. For example, when he asked me for $500, I was able to tell him that, you are a major in an army. You should be able to solve your own problems. And then when I had said that, of course, I got the answer saying that, of course, I will. I'm going to sell my Rolex. And now I got $5,000. And because I said to him then also that if you need this little money, you're not really a problem solver. I don't then believe that you are actually a major in the army. There was other, challenges I gave to him. And then we were also talking about how to transform your feelings into money, mostly like that. And then he was actually pointed me to this book called The Lazy Man's Way to Richness, which is a book which they have at Howard University for the business classes, and where people learn about advertising in a way that people are very well manipulated. So we did this kind of talk, and in the end, I just then sent him a very nice message saying that, it's been nice and I'm very happy. I've learned lots, but it would have been even better if it was true. His last words for me were, I love you very much. So it ended in a high.
It's clear in this instance that there are a lot of factors at play. Truman can see he's been found out, so in order to avoid confrontation and being held accountable, he goes viciously on the offensive and makes my mother into the liar and manipulator for smoking. He obviously wants out, and the best way for him to get out of this cleanly is to burn the bridge, to make sure that she will not continue seeking love from him, since he was never really going to provide that to her anyway. Here's a message from our sponsor, Happy Ever After.
Do you think dating and relationships are difficult and painful? Maybe you stopped believing that love will ever come your way, or you keep meeting Mr. Wrong over and over again. Would it not be nice to have someone who could help you make sense of it all? You're in luck, because now you can actually get a personal trainer for your heart. Valentina Tudos is a dating and relationship coach, and having her by your side is like having your very own fairy godmother. If you need to enhance your dating skills, manage your emotions, or deal with the complexities of online dating, Valentina is there every step of the way. Learn more about what it takes to find the love of your life and create the relationship of your dreams by visiting www.happyeverafter.asia and book your free discovery call today.
Chapter 2. The Scammers. Roger A. Grimes is an internet security expert and journalist who has developed a special interest in the world of online dating scams. A number of years ago, Roger A. Grimes was able to get in contact with a scammer from Nigeria. This is unbelievably rare. Most of the time, he says, as soon as their cover was blown, scammers would disappear. In this instance, Grimes had the chance to ask him about his motives.
Yeah, it was a lot of years ago, and it was probably close to 10 years, 7 to 10 years ago. But I talked to him. He was a young Nigerian male, and he eventually agreed to talk to me. Most of them just hang up or break off communications. But he agreed to talk to him, and he told me at the time that he made, he was able to make more. I forget whether it was several hundred or several $1,000s he could make each week, that he was, running a whole lot of different people under the romance game at the same time, that he went to an internet cafe. The internet cafe was full of people just like him. They weren't in the same gang per se. Like today, many times it's kind of like an organization, a loose organization, sometimes a corporation that's doing it together, and they pool their money and their gains together. But back then it was a bunch of young men sitting in a dusty, sandy internet cafe in Nigeria. He didn't have a whole lot of ethical qualms for his victims. He was not very empathetic with them. And he said that he was saving up money to buy his own internet cafe, and he was going to go legit, and he was just trying to get enough money from these gullible people until he could make it. Like, it was interesting that he didn't have a whole lot of ethical challenges in his mind, but he still thought himself an ethical person. And I think eventually during that one, I was actually able to identify him. I ended up figuring out what internet cafe he was at. There was a person that was able to turn on one of the cameras in an internet cafe, and we were able to take a picture of a whole bunch of people that were conducting this scam. And I actually it was kind of interesting. A lot of people kind of crowdsourced, collecting open source intelligence about this person and that group of people. And they found the exact cafe. They found a camera that was turned on. We could look at these people. And there was finally somebody, I think it was a British guy that actually lived there, that said he was going to go confront them, try to interview them as part of this crowdsourcing effort, just to continue the conversation. And that's when I had the FBI actually contact me and say, no, please do not do that. People that have done this have been killed. Do not attempt to connect with these people in public. You have no rights in that country. The countries have lax laws, and that the FBI themselves knew of people that had actually been killed each year when confronting these scammers. And so I've changed my advice. It was no longer fun and games. I had to go, listen, please don't do it. Let's stop the crowdsourcing thing. Do not confront these people. It could end up killing you in your life. I've actually been trying to update it and duplicate it, and over many, many years now, trying to interview more people, because it's a bit more professional now than it used to be. It's a lot more corporations and organizations. There's not the onesie-twosie people. Just like all cybercrime, it's become a professional thing, more professional even in Nigeria. And so I've been wanting to interview them, and sadly, every single time, no matter how hard I try to go, listen, I don't want to get you in trouble. I just want to interview you. I've even thought about paying people, although I've never mentioned that, but I can't get them. As soon as I break my cover and say that I'm a journalist and I want to interview them, they immediately never contact me again. Maybe one of the interesting things is I've been getting a lot of, I've got like 7,000 followers on LinkedIn or something, but lately I've been getting a lot of romance scams on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the Microsoft professional network, and for years, up until the last couple of months, never a romance scam. But for the last couple of months, I've been getting new romance scams about once every couple of weeks on LinkedIn. And a lot of me and my LinkedIn contacts, we laugh. We're like, LinkedIn is like the last place you would go for romance. But it turns out, romance is everywhere.
Kathleen is in her early 50s and was scammed by a man who claimed to be an offshore underwater welder. He said he needed some money to complete his last job before retirement. Kathleen hadn't heard of Skype or FaceTime back then, so she didn't ever request to speak face-to-face with him. Next thing she knew, her scammer claimed he was very sick.
Claimed to be Danish, so it sounded a little bit French. It was very, very appealing, very soft-spoken. Did not really match his appearance. Mine was not a young, gorgeous, good-looking man. Mine was a middle-aged man, about my age, 52, gray hair. I had got several pictures of him. He was very, very intelligent, kind, told me wonderful things about myself that I felt like I needed to hear. I got some love letters, but I did not get gifts like many did. I just got letters, emails, texts, telephone calls. He also brought in my mother into the situation and was calling my mother. I don't know what his thinking was there, other than they normally push your family away. In this case, he brought my mother into it. He would call her 2-3 times a week, just telling her that he was concerned about me being alone waiting for him. He told me that he had all of his assets tied up into that last job and that he was paying astronomical amount of money for satellite telephone so he could contact me. After about a month, supposedly on this job site, which was offshore in Los Angeles, California, on an oil rig, claimed that he needed fresh water supply and didn't have access to any funds. So at that time, I wired him $1,800. Things went on for about another month, just the same. I heard from him 2 or 3 times a day. And he claimed he needed fresh water supply again. And at that time, I sent him $1,700. And what happened is, over the next couple months, he progressively acted like he was getting very sick and under a lot of stress. And what he was working up to is the big emergency, medical emergency. He claimed to have had a stroke while at sea offshore, and he needed $5,000 for a medical transport helicopter to bring him to me. When he claimed to have the stroke, I pretty much demanded a picture of him at that time, and they must have found a picture that was kind of believable of a man with gray hair in a hospital bed. In the meantime, I was really suspicious, and I got a hold of the United States Coast Guard. I was trying to find out how I could do this transport myself. I spoke with a gentleman who told me this is really the case and it's a medical emergency. He's offshore. Well, contact the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard spent apparently about 7 hours one day scanning the Pacific Ocean from San Diego to Los Angeles looking for this vessel. They came back to me and told me that they had not got any response from this. He called me that night, panting and out of breath and claiming that he was very, very ill and begging me to please get him help. And I told him about this, and he told me that he heard the signal, but he didn't respond. He just made it out like it was top secret. What ended up happening is I ended up wiring him $5,000 more. And the very next morning, he called me again, claiming he needed $11,000, at which time I ended the conversation and ended the relationship. I knew then I'd been scammed. Initially, it was extreme anger. I remember crying. It was kind of different for me because I was so angry that it seemed like my feelings for him disappeared immediately. Once I started doing some research on it and learning more and more, I used what happened to me. I used it in a good way, and now I help people that are victims of the scam. And so, out of bad came good in my case. I've helped people.
Kathleen went on to start 2 Facebook groups for victims of online dating scams. She teaches people how to vet online dating profiles and spot scammers. She's done extensive research on romance scams and is now an advocate for victims. In the next episode, we'll see how there can be 20/20 vision with hindsight. From the safety of her own home, Jules starts to see the signs and signals that were there all along, leading her into this trap. Make sure you listen to the next episode of Fool Me Twice, safe and sound. Fool Me Twice is based on a memoir of the same name by my mother, Jules Hannaford, and is written and directed by me, Zara Hannaford. It's produced and edited by Jules Hannaford, with music and sound design by Shayde Furlong. Our theme song was sung by Angele Meyerhoff. Thanks to all the actors, experts, victims of scams, and the scammer who contributed to this podcast. If you suspect that you or someone you love may be involved in a romance scam, please reach out to Advocate Against Romance Scams on Facebook for support, or contact your local police for advice. You can get your own copy of Jules' memoir, Fool Me Twice, on Amazon. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Fool Me Twice on Apple Podcasts, and then please share it with your friends and family. If you'd like to support the production of Fool Me Twice, please go to Patreon and search for Fool Me Twice. For as little as $5 or $10 a month, you can see more of the Skype chat between Truman and Jules, receive online dating safety tips, and get your own copy of Jules' memoir.
Over 5 million Australians listen to podcasts every month. Make sure your brand is in the mix. At Podvertise, we are partnered with a global leader in digital audio advertising solutions. This means you get to reach your target audience with ease, within budget, and with proven results. Have your brand heard now at podvertise.com.au.
You know that feeling you get when someone is just a great listener? And you just feel like they've given you space to talk through whatever it is that's on your mind. And afterwards, you come away feeling somehow lighter, definitely supported. Or what about times when someone said to you, "Oh, I feel so much better after talking to you"? What was it exactly that you did? In times of grief or when people we love need support in what they're going through, we use this skill called holding space. It's pretty simple really, but it's definitely something we can practice and get better at. Holding space is a way to become comfortable with vulnerability and to make it possible for others to feel really taken care of. I've created an online course that breaks down exactly what it is about holding space that feels so essential to human relationships. I've included practical advice on how we can hold space even better for the people in our lives without depleting our own resources. That part's important. This course is for friends, parents, teachers, mentors, and kind of anybody who cares. Visit my website to register your interest. Enrollment opens soon. movecreateplay.com/holding space.